Hey everybody, thank you for listening to Performance Anxiety on the Pantheon Podcast Network. I'm your host Mark, and I want to thank our sponsor AKG for sending us their Podcaster Essentials Kit. It has a Lyra mic and a set of headphones that are amazing. If you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, this is the best way to do it. Richard X. Heyman and Nate Wilcox join me to discuss the songwriting of Ray Davies. Or is it Davis? I don't know. Is he underappreciated or not? Is he appreciated just enough? Richard and Nate discuss how they discovered and obsessed over the Kinks. They share some wild stories and some favorite songs. Ray has been a big influence on Richard's writing. And Richard has a new album out, and we discuss where Ray's presence might be felt. Nate talks about how he started his wonderful podcast, Let It Roll, and where he sees it going in future episodes and series. Check out Richard X. Heyman's new album, Copious Notes, wherever you get music these days. Listen to Nate's podcast, Let It Roll, on the Pantheon Podcast Network, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us at Performance ANX on all the socials. We take coffee at ko-fi.com/performanceanxiety. Merch is found at performanceanx.threadless.com. Okay, enough of all this. Let's get going on the songwriting of Ray Davies with Richard X. Heyman and Nate Wilcox on Performance Anxiety, part of the Pantheon Podcast Network. I'm joined today by Richard X. Heyman, and Nate.
On some pants.
And Nate Wilcox from the Let It Roll pod. How's everybody doing this evening?
Beautiful, very good.
Doing well.
All right, well,
Glad to be here.
I appreciate you guys joining me. I like to do episodes like this every once in a while because I like to try to learn things, and I'm not the most familiar with Ray Davies' catalog. I know a lot of the hits, but I don't know the deep stuff. I don't know things, and the hits are actually amazing when you go back and listen to them. And I didn't realize how many there were. Going back and looking at the just a greatest hits album is 2 albums long, and they're both I'm looking at the greatest hits. It's 44 songs, which is amazing. Some bands haven't written that many songs. He wrote 44 hits. But I want to go a little bit deeper. I want to find out what you guys think about Ray Davies' catalog, and I'm thinking he might be one of the most underappreciated songwriters of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So how did you guys come to find out about Ray Davies? Richard, let's start off with you. When did you first discover Ray and the Kinks?
Well, it started pretty much in the beginning here in America when You Really Got Me.
You really got me going. You got me so I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, you really got me now. You got me so I can't sleep at night. Yeah, you really got me now. You got me so I don't know what I'm doing. Oh yeah, you really got me now. You got me so I can't sleep at night.
It was pretty revolutionary. It was like unlike anything we had heard. That kind of overdriven guitar sound, that energy, the angst, it was just a new sound, and it was pretty exciting.
I heard that was, for all intents and purposes, the first song with an overdriven guitar. And it was that on purpose or was it an accident? I can't remember the story. Do you remember the whole story behind how they got that sound on the guitar?
Yeah, well, I believe the story goes that Dave Davies was fooling around with his amp and started sticking needles into the speaker, trying to make it sound tougher. I guess they were listening to some blues artists that had kind of a little bit of a grungy sound on their guitars, from Chuck Berry even. And so they were trying to emulate that. And Dave, and I guess with Ray's approval, made his little amp just sound like a fuzz box, and way before fuzz boxes were even known, and right. That was the origin.
Nate, how did you come to find out about the Davies and the Kinks?
And I had to be a know it all, but I've been burned on this before. They actually say it Davis rather than Davies. So
Really?
yes, and so if you have a Brit guest on your show, they'll burn you with that one if you call him Davies. But I still call him Davies just so people will know who I'm talking about.
I didn't know that.
I'm sticking with Davies.
Yeah, it lets people know who you're talking about. And there's no Brits here, but
Right.
but they're pretty insistent on that's how they say it. I originally came to the Kinks through my older brother's late 70s Arista albums, Misfits and Sleepwalker, and the rewrite of You Really Got Me that was one of their later hits in 1982, Self-Destruction or Paranoia, I can't remember the name of it, but those were my first exposure to the Kinks. But where I really got into them was through just fate. The record shops in Amarillo, when I was a teenager, Amarillo, Texas, had scads of Spanish import versions of the British albums. So we got our hands on Kink Controversy, we got our hands on Face to Face, Village Green Preservation Society, Something Else, all those kind of Kinks, all those classic albums that were absolutely out of print in the 80s. And me and all my friends just leapt on those things and devoured them. I can remember reading the lyrics to Village Green Preservation Society on the car ride home, and it was like an hour home to my even smaller hick town to get to a record player. And just reading the lyrics to Village Green Preservation Society, I knew that I had something special in my hand and just absolutely fell in love with that album. And of course, I knew You Really Got Me and inescapable song, an inescapable classic, but I had no way to hear those middle works other than those out of print albums we got our hands on.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize that those albums were out of print at that time. My introduction to the Kinks is mainly started through a couple of hits and covers, like Van Halen doing a couple of Kinks songs. So reading liner notes and discovering, they didn't write those songs. Who did? And I would go back and I would listen to it. And I didn't really get into the Kinks because by the time I was really introduced to them, I was more into Zeppelin and Floyd and the longer psychedelics, more intricate, complex stuff. And I didn't realize a lot of that probably started with their single, See My Friends, which I didn't hear until much, much later. I think that's possibly my favorite Kinks song ever.
It's a pivotal one, absolutely important. It really introduces those, even though they didn't use a sitar on that record, they tuned their guitars deliberately based on sounds they heard while they were flying through India. They stopped in India for like a day on their way to Australia on their first international tour. And there's a story in either Ray or Dave's autobiography of, Ray is sitting on his balcony listening to incredible Indian music, and Dave is on the beach running for his life from a pack of rabid dogs, which is just a classic Kinks story.
Oh, that's awesome. Man. So what is it about Ray Davies' music and songwriting that you like? Richard, is there something about it? Because I hear a lot of very straightforward songwriting. There isn't anything obtuse or complex about it. It's very very straightforward, blue collar themes, perfect pop structure. It seems like it's a great package for radio. Is there something in it that you particularly are drawn to?
Well, he's just a natural. I mean, some people just have this ability to come up with great melodies over interesting chord changes. And he has such a vast repertoire that it's hard to even talk about a style, because there's English music hall, there's what became almost a prototype for punk rock and, heavy metal or hard rock.
Yeah.
There's, songs that could be on a Broadway show with just the beauty of the melodies. And so he's just one of those gifted songwriters. He's like Richard Rodgers, or, he's just got the knack to come up with the goods. And, I always think of this quote about, this is a little off topic, but just to give you an idea of what I think about Ray is, I'm a drummer and I'm a big fan of Buddy Rich. And Louis Bellson once said of Buddy Rich, somebody out there, you'll never, somebody may be as good as Buddy Rich out there, but nobody's better. And that's how I feel about Ray.
Wow.
It's like, maybe somebody's written some songs as good as Ray, but nobody's going to be better than Ray. He's the best at that type of songwriting, in my opinion.
The Kinks went through, like you said, a lot of different sounds. And I'm looking at a couple pages here. They have it kind of broken down into Kinks' early years, which are up to 65. They have what they call the mid period from 65 to 75, and then the later sound, 76 to 84. Is there an era there that really speaks to you more than others? And Richard, we'll go back to you to start with. Is there an era of the Kinks and Ray Davies songwriting that really?
Rock and roll, and I guess any art, especially music, is so age related. And because I was of the age to be just totally blown away by the British invasion when it happened, the Kinks played a big part in my upbringing and my musical influence. So, it's just a very important era for me. And I just sort of rode the whole tidal wave of the Kinks albums as each one came out and know them inside out. It's just part of my life. And the bands that I played in, especially the main band that I played in back in that day, did all the Kinks covers you could imagine. All the hits and some obscure album cuts.
Oh, cool. Nate, what about you? Is there a period of the Kinks that you're really drawn to?
I'm fond of all of them. The first period, of course, has the wild, You Really Got Me, and that All Day and All the Night, just the feral stuff. And I'm a big fan of that early British R&B stuff, which was an acquired taste. It took a lot of listening to their first album. I remember getting my hands on their first album, and it's got You Really Got Me on it, and then the rest of it is just sort of stock British R&B. But I came to really love that stuff and their sound. But then Kinks Controversy, my God, that is to me just the perfect album, because they're still feral. Dave hasn't been tamed yet, and so it's got their version of Milk Cow Blues is just so insane. I think it's just absolutely 1965 state-of-the-art rock and roll. But it's also got the first beginnings of Ray's more mature songwriting. And then, by the time you get to Village Green, which is just, to me, the absolutely perfect album, I remember when I first bought it, I would listen to it for hours and hours every day, to the point the whole family is just telling me, please, anything, turn that off. But I could hear the whole album in my head at once when I went to bed at night. I could hear every song playing at the same time. So, that's absolutely, probably one of my favorite albums of all time. But that later stuff, the 70s arena rock stuff they did, has many great songs on it. So I can't pick a favorite era, and I didn't get to see them live. I missed the show when they came through. I think it was Las Cruces, New Mexico, was the closest I ever had a shot to see him when I was outside Carlsbad, but couldn't get it together despite begging my big brother for weeks to give me a ride there. So it's hard to pick a favorite era, but a lot of strengths in that discography.
Since I'm mostly familiar with the hits and I haven't really dived super deep into their catalog, I want to know a couple things from each of you guys. And you kind of brought this up and you made me think of this. What album would a novice like myself, what one would each of you recommend that I listen to? And what's maybe a deep cut that's not a hit that you like specifically? One that you would say, oh, this is one of my favorites. It's not a hit, but this is a great song.
Well, I mean, I would start with the greatest hits, just a one CD with the greatest hits with You Really Got Me and the hits. But the second one I would get is Kinks Chronicles, which is an album that their first record label put out after they left for RCA. And it's a really weird greatest hits package because I think Ray assembled it himself. And it's got numerous hit singles. It's got Victoria and many others, but it has B-sides, it has tracks that were never released anywhere else, and it really gets that Britishness of the Kinks across. And there's songs like Wellesley Green and Berkeley Mews, and these songs about these British locations and tea time and Sunday roast, and for me as a Texan, it was so evocative of a place that seemed so exotic and glamorous to me. And it's just, you can hear where Paul Weller and the Jam got their entire act from, and Blur too, that evoking of Britishness was a go-to move for guitar bands for the next 2 decades, and it all comes from the Kinks. Well,
in listening to some of the stuff, I've decided that half of the Gorillaz' vocal styling is based on Sunny Afternoon.
The taxman's taken all my dough and left me in my stately home, blazing on a sunny afternoon, and I can't sail my yacht. He's taken everything I got. All I've got's this sunny afternoon.
Yeah, I could see that.
So, all right, Richard, what about you? What's an album that you would recommend I dive into, and maybe a lesser known track that you really love?
Well, it's tough because let's go into that, I guess what I would call the mid period, which really for me starts with Kinks Controversy. But it's like amazing because there's this litany of albums, Face to Face, Something Else, Village Green, and each one is as good as the next or the last one. It's uncanny. I can't think of any other group that has 4 albums in a row, and then you could throw in Arthur and Lola versus the Power Man too, and they're all equally significant and great. I mean, I remember when Kinks Controversy came out, I bought that album for a friend of mine who was kind of a casual fan. Most of my friends were musicians. He was a non-musician, and I bought him that album, and he thanked me profusely after he delved into it and got to about that third listening and was hooked. And he said, God, I can't thank you enough for giving me this album. It's so great. And so maybe let's go with Kinks Controversy, though. Okay. Face to Face, Something Else. God, they're so great.
I'm pulling them up right now, looking at the track listings and all, and so much of it is recognizable. It's amazing. Is there a deep cut that you particularly like that you'd wish maybe got a little more attention?
Oh God, there's so many. I mean, let's go. I mean, one of my favorites is Animal Farm from Village Green. Okay. I'm going with songs that just bring me to tears.
Yeah.
And that's one of them.
Where the hound dogs bark, that we call down home. I wanna be back there among the cats and dogs, and the pigs and the goats on Animal Farm, my animal home, on Animal Farm, my animal home.
I love, because that's one thing I love about rock and roll is when you can't hold your emotions in because it's either so melancholy or joyful, and next thing you know, you're tearing up from the music, and it's just that's what art is all about. So Animal Farm for sure.
Okay.
But there's I could go on and on. I mean,
Maybe we should do a Kinks.
Days.
Yeah. We should put together an album of just Kinks deep cuts that should have been hits.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think he is the most prolific writer in rock and roll that kept a certain standard from beginning to end. He's always right up there in just the proficiency, just beautiful writing. And, some writers kind of would start to fade toward the end of their careers. Others, lost their singing voice. But Ray just kind of maintained a very high standard, especially just even if you're just looking at the 60s work, from the first album to whatever it is, Arthur or Lola. I mean, I think Lola came out in around 70, 71. But I kind of include that in the 60s group because it's just kind of an extension of what he was doing, I think, on Arthur.
Okay. Nate, what about you? Is there I don't think I asked you to pull out a deep cut yet. Did I? Yeah,
I mean, so many come to mind. Did you see his name off King Chronicles is one that I just especially love. But
did you see his name in the local paper? Stole a tin of beans from the cut price grocery store. The judge said he must pay, so they put him on probation. The paper gave his name. Did you see his name?
But there's a whole album of deep cuts called the Great Lost Kinks album, where Village Green was supposed to be a double album, a Ray Davies solo album. And it was cut down to a single because they were absolutely at their commercial bottom at that point. They could not buy a hit in the States or in the UK. So it was cut down to just one album. And when they came back after Lola and Victoria, Pi put out an album that only stayed in print for a little while, but you can get it easily now, called the Great Lost Kinks album. And it is just full of really strange songs that don't quite fit with the Kinks that you could see as Ray Davies solo albums, solo songs. Like there's one, When I Turn Off the Living Room Light, that is about an old dude and his ugly wife imagining that she's beautiful. And it's just such a beautiful song. So I would have to go with the whole album. With the Great Lost Kinks album would be my secret track.
I will accept that. So with all this being said, I kind of went into this whole thing thinking, maybe Ray is underappreciated, undervalued, and I'm kind of wondering about that because when you look at all the songs, you see songs that I've known my whole life, maybe not always realize they were Kinks songs, but do you think he's kind of underappreciated? Or am I maybe just unfamiliar with the discography and in thinking that maybe he's a little underappreciated?
I think people in the know obviously appreciate him.
Right.
Musicians who really care about songcraft and just that level of really strong songwriting. But you're right. I mean, the story was, because they got banned from America in the mid-'60s and didn't get to tour like all the other British bands, they lost some traction. That's part of the mythology of why they're not in the same stratosphere as when people talk about these kind of arena acts like Led Zeppelin and Paul McCartney, these and the Stones, they can all still to this day sell out arenas. Where the Kinks, it's not going to happen. They're down a few notches. I don't know why, but it's just the way it is. I mean, they weren't a show group like the Who or Led Zeppelin. They had a great live band, but they weren't an exciting, exhilarating, show-stopping visual band like when the first time I saw the Who, it was just such a visual onslaught along with the sound.
Pink Floyd, bands like that, yeah.
The Kinks, just were a good solid rock band, and they had this genius songwriter and a great lead guitar player and co-writer sometimes with Dave. And,
Yeah. What about you, Nate? Do you think that he's underrated maybe in the general public?
I think the thing is that the Kinks are so great, and their competition is, the Beatles, the Who, the Stones, and Led Zeppelin, like you mentioned, like the very biggest bands of their era, the greatest bands of their era. And even though they're probably my personal favorite out of I don't know. I've had years of being obsessed with the Stones and the Beatles too. So, but the Kinks have a very special place in my heart. But if you really study their career, you can see why they didn't get as big. Like Andrew Loog Oldham, the first manager of the Stones, once said at a banquet 5-10 years ago, that a great band has a great manager, and the Kinks did not have a great manager. And he called out their management team by name, and they had terrible management. The kind of management that Ray Davies by 1965 is already in court suing his management team to get his publishing rights back and all this kind of stuff. So they did not have a Brian Epstein or an Andrew Loog Oldham who could really put him up at the top and shepherd him. And like Richard said, they were not as visually compelling as the Stones or the Who. And their arrangements, if you listen to their albums, I think stack up with anybody from the era. But if you listen to their singles as part of like a singles compilation from that era, they would repeat the same arrangements. So like, You Really Got Me is followed by All Day and All of the Night. And then, there's I Want You, which is a third version, which was a B-side, but they do the same thing with the piano descent on Sunny Afternoon. And they use basically the same intro for Waterloo Sunset. So you can see, even though the songs were absolutely as great as anything anybody else was putting up, the Beatles had this unfair advantage. Lennon would come in with a great song, and McCartney and Harrison would dive in with these arrangement ideas, and vice versa when McCartney came in with a great song. With Ray, he was kind of on his own, even though Dave was a powerful force and contributed. Dave was also 17 when they got famous, and
wow.
Can I use curse words here?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. So, when I first read about the Kinks after a couple years of getting into their mid-period stuff, and they were so, this gentle bucolic sound and everything, then you read about them, and they're these absolute animals. The quote about Dave Davis is that, he'd fuck anything that moved, man or woman, and if he couldn't fuck it, he'd fight it, and
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
So, and Ray talks in his memoirs about how alone he felt because his brother just turns into this frothing at the mouth pillhead lunatic. Wow. And, Mick Avery is this goon who nearly decapitated Dave on stage once with his cymbals.
Really?
Yeah, and Pete Quaife, and Pete Quaife is a fine bass player, but he's no, Paul McCartney or Brian Jones that's going to come in with some great, arrangement idea. So, he's kind of held back in that, and the pressure of having to have hits. And once, I think it's Who'll Be the Next in Line wasn't a hit. And so he was under this real pressure to get hits, and so he had to kind of repeat himself, just because of the pressure of the pop marketplace. And remember, they had to come up with a hit single every 6 weeks. Oh, so wow. It was just and going up against the Beatles, the Stones, the Yardbirds, Manfred Mann. I mean, plus Motown, plus Stax. I mean, it was a brutal competition and a very short-term memory environment. So, that's kind of where they struggled. And then they never got the Marshall amps, and eventually did have kind of an arena, a long period of arena success in the States in the 70s, but it took them a long time to figure out how to play arenas after Lola is a hit. They come over here and they're pretty often drunk on stage, and they had to replace multiple members of the band, and Pete Quaife quit and John Dalton comes in, and so they had to kind of learn how to put on a big arena show, and it took them a while, but they've eventually, by the end of the 70s, they were a gold album, selling out 5,000-6,000 seat arenas across the state. So they got to a pretty high level. But yeah, and then do you know the story of why they were banned by the American Federation of Musicians?
I know that I've heard it, but I don't remember it. So yeah, feel free to fill me in.
According to Ray, they're at the end of this tour, which is this just total shambolic odyssey across America. And he hears some loudmouthed American talking about, these limey queers, and we bailed their ass out in the big one, blah, 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 and he turns around and there's this old guy with a crew cut, and Ray just flattens the guy with the right cross, just boom, and lays him out. And that's the kind of thing that'll get you banned. Turns out the guy was a vice president of the American Federation of Musicians Union. So, that's
that'll do it.
Yeah. So stuff like that. So yeah, stuff like that, like, or the song Dedicated Follower of Fashion, Ray wrote it because he got in a knockout, drag-out brawl at a party in London with the fashion maven, like, breaking a bottle over the guy's head and stuff, God. And then thought, well, what'd be smarter than rolling around in the gutter is writing a song about it. So.
They seek him here, they seek him there. His clothes are loud, but never square. It will make or break him, so he's got to buy the best, 'cause he's a dedicated follower of fashion. And when he does...
Well, that's why some of his songs sound so true, because it's actual events that happened, I guess.
Yeah.
So, Richard, has Ray Davies influenced your songwriting a lot? Because going through your catalog and listening to the new album, I hear a lot of maybe like Birds, jangly, that 60s era. It's a little more complex than like a lot of the straightforward Kinks music, but then again, I am not 100% familiar with their entire catalog. So is there a Ray Davies influence in your songwriting?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, but it's an amalgam of all those people we've been talking about. I mean, I grew up in the 60s, and how could you not, be influenced by the new Beatle album or the new, Bob Dylan album for that matter. I mean, there's just so much great music going on. And like Nate said, Motown is happening in Stax. And so, yeah, I definitely was hit hard by all of that. But, I try not to think about it when I'm writing a song. It doesn't even really cross my mind. I think you're just trying to express yourself, and then whatever comes out, then you look back at it and say, oh, I see this and this kind of influenced me. But you try not, to dwell on trying to emulate anyone. That's a big mistake, I think.
I can see that, yeah, because you don't want to copy anything. You don't mind being influenced by something, but you don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started putting out my own music, I was sitting with some writers, I think it was from Rolling Stone magazine, and they were saying there's something about your music that's a different. It seems like it wants to be kind of British, but it's not. And I said, it's because, I'm American, and I love a lot of American music, and I'm a big fan of soul music and R&B. I love the band. I mean, they're from Canada, but it's got that kind of rootsy thing. So
right.
All those styles are swirling around in songwriters' heads that, all you have to do, like Brian Wilson said, you just got to listen.
Yeah.
That's why he was so influenced by Phil Spector. He said, you got to just listen to it and you learn from it.
That's right. Now, this new album that you came out, how did you come up with the name Copious Notes?
Oh, that's just another one of my puns. It's basically taking the familiar phrase copious notes, which we all think about when you're sitting in a lecture hall in college or something, you're taking copious notes. But then it hit me musical notes. So just a lot of notes. And then I looked up the word, what it actually meant, and other than just, kind of plural and meaning many, it also means thoughtful and has some other nice connotations. So that would be a nice title.
It fits in with the rest of your catalog, and you've always done such clever titles.
I love puns, I like puns that kind of make you groan, but that's what makes a good pun, when somebody groans.
Yeah. Well, it kind of makes me smile, like a lot of your music. So,
oh, thank you.
Was this album recorded in your home studio?
Yeah, I have kind of a modus operandi. I start at a regular studio, a big 24, whatever they are these days. I don't even know how many tracks it was, but
yeah.
And I set up a drum set in the middle of a big studio and just put down drum tracks. And then I take all those home to the computer and start layering.
Okay.
So each thing one at a time with my wife.
Did the whole pandemic and lockdown, did that have an effect on the album at all, and how you recorded it or wrote any of the music for it?
It must have, because it was all done starting in the summer of 2020. So we were in the thick of it.
Yeah.
All that kind of out exterior, situations definitely creep in to the creative process. You can't help it.
Right.
But again, I don't want to think about we're isolated, we're in quarantine. I just was trying to write songs the best I could. And then when you're done and you look back at it and you say, hey, this is kind of like a melancholy song. And I think being in that predicament definitely, snuck in there. It's in the lyrics. It's like the opening line of the album is, the dark is getting to you, and this you're not alone. And I thought, oh yeah, that's pretty much the way everybody's feeling these days.
Yeah, but with a lot of your work, it's actually it's more positive than anything, because you're saying, you're not alone. We're all going through this together.
Right. I'll take that as a compliment, because that's really what you try to do. I mean, it's what I always call the happy, sad aspect of pop music.
Yeah.
Like, you take many Ray Davies songs that are just beautiful and you can tear up, and at the same time they're joyful because they're so wonderful.
Yeah. And Nate, if you have any questions or any comments, just jump on in. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about cutting me off.
I just want to compliment Richard on the new album. I mean, I thought it was one of your best since Hey Man. And I haven't kept up. You'd had a couple albums that had dropped that I hadn't caught up with, so I'm looking forward to catching up on the last 2 or 3. But man, it was good. And I noticed that first line, and I did immediately think of the pandemic. But the music's so beautiful and happy. It really didn't have a downer feel to it at all. It really made me feel good. And it also, I just wanted to ask you one question. Have you been to listen to a lot of stiff stuff like Elvis Costello and Nick Lowe? Because for some reason I'm getting that vibe off of the album.
Well, yeah, you couldn't avoid it. I mean, when it came out, I always tell the story how I was living down in Maryland at the time, in the mid-70s. I was playing drums for Link Ray, of all people. He's talking about distorted guitars, because he's really the inventor of the power chord back with Rumble in 1958.
Yeah.
Which, anyway, that's a whole other story. But I was playing drums for him, and I was just starting to kind of come out of drummer mode and try my hand at, the singer-songwriter thing, and was writing songs. And I was trying to do what I thought was kind of an interesting thing, which was kind of Beatlesque on one hand, a little influence of Dylan with the lyrics and the band, and putting that all together. And I was in a music store, and all of a sudden I hear, and it sounded like me. And I said, damn, what is that? That's not me. That's somebody doing what I was trying to do much better than what I was even content. It was Elvis Costello. Damn. And I was like Homer Simpson, like, don't. He really just nailed it. He had kind of the melodicism of the Beatles with the sophisticated lyrics and kind of that subtle kind of ambiguity. You couldn't really tell what he was talking about, but it just sounded important. And he had that voice, which he had this angst. So no, I listened to a lot of that stuff at the time. Very jealous, but it was really good because I went back to the drawing board after that and said, okay, I got to really, buckle down and write better lyrics than I've been writing. Can't be lazy in the lyric department. And so, I listened to that. But, going back to Ray, too, I mean, he set a certain standard along with Dylan. He's very British, and he talked about class aspirations in England, which, we all can't totally relate to, but
right.
he knows what he's talking about. And it just sounds like very knowledgeable about what the lower classes were aspiring to and, wanted to be this or that or satisfied with what they had. So, all that definitely was an influence.
What I liked about the Ray Davies music that I know is the very clear, concise songwriting. It's very upfront about what he's trying to say, and that's what I liked about stuff like the song Cedarbrook Park. It's a great story. It's very clear.
Marching band would practice down by Randolph Road. I'd run out to watch them, hear the drums explode. Majorettes would lead them, such a swelling sound. They would play till after dark. I was filled with laughter and Cedarbrook Park.
It's very accessible. It's not. It's not like some of maybe Dylan's more obtuse works or something.
Or Elvis Costello's.
Yeah.
Where you don't know what he's talking about.
Exactly.
That's not a problem with Richard's songs.
No.
That song Cedarbrook Park was one of the few totally autobiographical songs that I've written, and it was influenced in a way by the Beatles' Penny Lane Strawberry Fields single, where I was in kind of an exercise in, I got to write about my hometown and what actually happened to me or places that I know. And so I took this piano waltz that was just an instrumental and I turned it into a song. And then I had been writing a lot of instrumental piano pieces. That's basically what most of the songs on this album started as.
Oh, okay.
They were just these piano pieces that I recorded as quick demos. And I listened to them, picked the ones that had a certain listenability. And sometimes I would combine a couple of them, maybe change the key to one to fit as a B part to another instrumental. And those became the bulk of this album. And then I took the piano arrangement out for the most part on a lot of them, replaced it with guitar, or sunk the piano back into the mix more.
Do you have a set schedule or a set process for how you write? I mean, are you sitting down and making yourself write something every day, or is there something else?
No, I mean, you're going to get the same answer from any songwriter pretty much. Just whatever happens. You get inspired to write. A lot of the times, the truth of the matter is a lot of it is just noodling on an instrument. And something starts to sound good to you. You're starting with things that are familiar, chords and then maybe you'll move your pinky over either one note on the guitar or on the piano. Next thing you know, it's like, what is that? That's something I haven't done before. And so you start to just noodle away and you get a little progression going. And then, a melody can pop over top of that. And so, it's a lot of it's happenstance, some of it's trial and error, and some of it's just inspiration that you got.
Nate, tell me a little bit about your podcast, because you and I are on the same network, the Pantheon Podcast Network, and I really enjoy it. But tell my listeners a little bit about what your podcast is about and why they need to listen to it.
Well, it's the tagline has been for a while how pop music happens, because I was in some failed bands and I had the opportunity to do 24 interviews with Ed Ward, the author of The History of Rock and Roll, who just sadly passed away recently. And so I got to really learn from the master at how to analyze trends and how to look at music by following the audience and looking at the technology instead of a big picture cultural thing. But I've recently sort of changed my tagline to the most ambitious musical podcast you're ever going to hear, because I've got the 24-part History of Rock and Roll with Ed Ward. I'm about to drop an 8-part History of Country Music with a guy named James Porter that's based off the Ken Burns documentary.
Cool.
I've got a 16-part hip-hop history that's based off Netflix Hip Hop Evolution that I do with Eugene S. Robinson of the band Oxbow and Alexi Old, who's a veteran entertainment lawyer. And then a 24-part history of techno music, which was not my space. Like I knew nothing about dance music until I read the book Last Night a DJ Saved My Life about 20 years ago by Brewster and Broughton, and realized, oh my God, DJs, this is, disco only comes alive when a DJ plays it on records. It's not about, the MFSB album or the Barry White album and what they did in the studio, which is how I had been trying to get disco. And obviously I couldn't go back in time and go to a discotheque in the 70s and have that full experience. But once I realized, I'm dumb, so somebody had to explain it to me. No, it's about the DJ with the 2 turntables making the drum break go longer and watching the dance floor and watching what and then I went, so just wrapped up the first 24 episodes of that. Wow. And with an interview with Brewster and Broughton. So, and my goal is to do opera, blues, gospel, ragtime to a similar ambitious level. So, at the end, I'm hoping to have, a dozen episode series on virtually every major musical genre. So that's what the Let It Roll podcast is.
That's impressive and ambitious.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing that keep you alive for a long time.
Or kill you, one or the other.
Yeah.
I think I need to spend more time with you and learn about how to read trends. I think that's something I need to work on.
I mean, it's, fascinating stuff. I turned off pop music in like 91. I stopped following new stuff because I was in a band and we had our own vision. And also I'd just been burned buying so many albums that everybody was hyping up. And, I love Soundgarden, but their first 2 or 3 albums suck, frankly. And I remember going to the store all hyped up about this band from Seattle and, getting Ultra Mega OK home and it just sucking. So I just stopped. But then like 10 years later, I was able to I heard about Outkast. I heard an Outkast song and I was like, that's pretty cool. Cause I'd stopped listening to hip hop around the time that Biz Markie got sued and you couldn't sample anymore. Oh yeah. And so, here's Outkast and they've got 5 albums and they're all great. And discovering that, or Stereolab, here's this weird French band that's into psychedelic music, and they've got 9 albums, boom. It's so much more efficient than trying to keep up. But since I started doing the show, I've been kind of trying to catch up with the last 25, 30 years of pop music. And it's been really interesting. And at the same time, learning about ragtime or, minstrel music and so I'm just kind of skimming over the surface. I've got no illusion that I'm ever going to know this stuff the way I know, say, Beggar's Banquet, but we're living at this moment when you can hear virtually anything. So, I'm just trying to dig as much stuff as I can and trying to understand it as well as I can.
That's amazing. I am blown away by that. That is incredible.
My wife doesn't think.
I can only imagine, because I know what my wife thinks about me recording all the time. And when I'm not recording, I'm editing. So I know kind of what you're going through.
Indeed.
And then I'm sure
podcaster's plight.
I could say Richard, but his wife plays bass for him, so she's jumping in there.
Well, Richard's musically gifted, which is something I'm not. So
me too.
People like to hear Richard play and sing. And I can barely even get my kids to, let me play records.
I'm still trying to get listeners for this podcast. So Richard, where can people find them? How can they pick it up and follow you on social media and find? Are you going to be supporting the new stuff with tours or playing live with the Doughboys or anything in the near future?
I'm a bit of a Luddite with all this kind of new technology. I would say the best place to start as far as finding my music is my website, just richardxheyman.com. It's all there, all the albums, all the videos. So that's a one shop for all right there.
Excellent.
The Doughboys, unfortunately, have gone their separate ways.
Oh, man.
No more live shows for that band, which I'll miss because I have two beautiful vintage drum sets just packed away in my closet here, and I'm hoping I'll have some reason to break them out again. So as far as live shows for my solo thing, I haven't really planned on that yet.
Okay.
Things have been in such disarray because of the pandemic. Yeah. We'll see, but maybe we'll do a virtual show, at least from the bedroom.
That would be awesome. Yeah. Nate, how can people find the podcast and follow each of your episodes and your unbelievable series that you're dropping?
It's letitrollpodcast.com, the website, and it's on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts. I haven't been keeping up on SoundCloud, but all the other places you get your podcast, hopefully Pantheon is getting it out there. And so, yeah, the Let It Roll podcast, just Google it and you should be able to turn up the latest episode.
Excellent. Well, is there anything else you guys want to drop on Ray Davies or Richard, your stuff before we sign off and call this one a wrap?
Oh, gosh, there's so much to talk about, but I'm just so impressed with Nate's open-mindedness to all these different genres. I'm really impressed by that because we've been trying to expand our musical input here, and before the pandemic, we were regulars at Lincoln Center because we live here in New York, and we were really getting into Beethoven, because I heard about the guy. I heard he was supposed to be good, and he rolled over and all that. But when we heard Beethoven's First Symphony, we were just so blown away. We got to hear all the symphonies live, so we made a point of that. Every time the New York Philharmonic was doing a Beethoven symphony, we were there, and all the other greats like Mozart and Brahms. We got into that, and I started out as a jazz drummer. I'm still very heavily influenced by that, and so So when Nate was talking about doing a show about opera, I think that's great because people need to expand their musical horizons.
Exactly. I remember listening to opera with my grandfather, and that's kind of what I think of when I think of opera is what my grandfather listened to. And I listened to some of it out of nostalgia for that time period, but I'm kind of inspired now to open up to other genres. I've been lucky enough doing this podcast. I've been exposed to a lot of genres and bands that I wouldn't have otherwise by people reaching out and wanting to just talk about their music. And in fact, I would highly recommend anybody listening to this to go back and listen to Richard's episode that we did about a year or so ago. And Richard, you go into your incredible musical career and who you've worked with. Like you said, Link Wray, Brian Wilson, all kinds of people. Obviously the Doughboys. So you've got an incredible, rich musical history yourself. And I would really encourage everybody to listen to that episode and listen to your catalog. Go pick up Richard's albums because they're very uplifting. They're very positive. It's in a world where things go negative so quickly. It's awesome to hear somebody whose music is positive.
Oh, thank you.
So
I appreciate that. Thanks.
Absolutely. Well, guys, thank you so much. I know it's getting late. I don't want to keep everybody up all night. Like you said, we could talk about Ray Davies. We could spend all night doing it. But
can I tell one last Ray Davies story?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And this is one I read a long time ago in a fanzine, but it may or may not be true, but they were touring America in '65, first tour. They played a show in Illinois, I think Chicago, and the promoter took him back to their house. And Dave was by and very feminine with the long hair and everything. And 65, I mean, that meant, that was very charged sexually.
Yeah.
And this promoter's really into Dave, but he's given Dave the creeps. But Ray would always kind of egg Dave on in these things. And he almost ditched Dave and left him there at the promoter's house. And Dave was massively fucked up, of course.
Yeah.
And it turns out the promoter's name was John Wayne Gacy. So
Whoa.
there you go. But
God.
This suddenly became a true crime podcast.
yeah. A narrow miss for Dave Davis right there.
Wow. Holy crow. I never heard that.
Again, I can't vouch for that. I read it in a fanzine like 20 years ago, but that's a story, and it's a good story.
It's a good one. It's a good one to end on. Guys,
Got topped up.
yeah. Guys, thank you so much. Richard, you've got an open invitation to come back whenever you like. Nate, I need to have you back on. And
Happy to do it.
Awesome.
This was fun.
I had a really great time.
I have to wonder why you would want me now. After all I've done before. 'Cause it's on me and I can't comprehend just how